Thank you for your prayers this morning. Most of you don't know this about me, but I struggle with greed. And that means I love money. I absolutely love it. I love money. There. I said it. I'm out of the closet now, again. This pulpit does that to me. But what you probably don't know is that I don't come from a privileged background. And I think when you don't come from privilege and every day is a struggle and you don't have the things you need, you make a vow to yourself that when you grow up, things will be different. And we didn't have many servants growing up. I can remember many a night going to bed without eating dessert when cook was away. And there were times where we had to live in very cramped quarters. My brother and I had to at one point share a small wing in our house for a few months when renovations were being done to the other wings in our family's home, and it was devastating. And I think it made me say, as God is my witness, I will never go hungry for dessert again, and I will never be forced to live in a small wing of a house again. And when I say I'm greedy, I don't mean I want to be like Oprah rich. Gosh, no, that's like God rich. But maybe more like John Key rich. That's a reasonable kind of wealth, don't you think? But the problem with being rich is, well, it's getting the money. I mean, that's a big part of it, having the money. And you all know that I work here in the church as the events manager. And I have to admit, I just can't see the work of the Lord becoming extremely lucrative for me here. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. But I did some thinking, and I think when you want something good to happen in your life, the first place to start is by listening to what other people who have achieved that goal have to say about how they did it. And so I listened to Oprah a lot. John Key, not so much. Oprah is amazing. And like I said, she's God rich, so she knows what she's talking about. Oprah says, think positive. If you want to be wealthy, positive thinking can help attract the money to you. It's like a magnet. She says to live in the world as if it is the way you want it to be. And I want to live in the world where I'm rich. So I've started doing that. I've been thinking positive and living in the world the way I want it to be. And so I recently applied for, Michael, it was maybe 10 credit cards. And I've gone shopping and have purchased all the spring lines from Dolce & Gabbana and Versace and Dior. And I bought some of that monogrammed Louis Vuitton luggage that most of the clergy use for my holiday in the islands. And as you can see, I'm wearing Prada today. And so for the past few months, I have been spending up large. And I have to tell you, I'm feeling pretty super positive and good about myself, like my dreams of great wealth might actually come true. I've been living in the world the way I want to be. And I was thinking, this is really working for me. But then I got credit card bills in the mail because banks send them like immediately. And I was feeling really gutted. And for the first time, I started doubting myself and my goals. And I thought to myself, now is not the time to doubt Auntie Oprah. Think positive. And when I said that to myself, the answer just came to me. So what I did was I applied for more credit cards, and of course the banks gave them to me. And I transferred the debt on the first cards to the new cards, and now the first cards are totally paid off. And so to celebrate my new savvy way of attracting money, I went shopping again. But then more bills came, and I'm starting to see the pattern. So I'm having to reevaluate my strategy because I'm thinking maybe I'm not doing it right, or maybe I'm just not being positive enough. And then I remembered that God helps those who help themselves. And it doesn't actually say that in the Bible, but I don't care. I believe it's true, and if more poor people like me would just help themselves by becoming money magnets, the world would be a better place. So I'm sorry to say that I'm having to seriously rethink my job situation here at the church. And I know that in some churches in America, and Clay knows this as well, that you can get rich by preaching. I don't want to move back to America. But then someone said to me, we have places like that in New Zealand where you should go be a preacher. It's quite lucrative. And but they say you get a ring, and all the men have to be promised or kind of like married to the pastor, like in a gay way, but it's not gay. I don't know, I don't understand it. But I know it's not going to work for me. My partner's incredibly jealous, and I'm trying to basically save money, get money by not spending it, and they say you have to pay for the ring yourself. I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking Jesus said something about money being the root of all evil, or something to that effect, but he, frankly, in my opinion, wasn't very clear, and in all fairness to me, he couldn't possibly have understood the fashion pressures on the gays of today. I mean, not only are we expected to look better than straight people, we're supposed to do it on the same incomes as you people, and it's impossible. And times are hard. There's no denying that. I know one friend who recently, I'm almost embarrassed for him, but he had to buy off the rack last month because of the recession. So times are hard, and people are fearful about spring and summer wardrobes, and it's looking pretty grim. And I pray sometimes at night, how long, O Lord, how long will your people, the gays, suffer, O God? But it didn't seem to be all bad news. I discovered a Christian movement in America called the Prosperity Movement, whose principles I can use here in New Zealand, so I don't have to go back to America. And it works under the doctrine that God indeed wants us Christians to be rich. You and I. God wants us to be rich. Okay, they don't use the word rich, they say prosperous, however you define that. I define prosperous as rich. And if God wants that for me, well. So I was thinking of joining this movement, but then I read the parable that was our gospel reading this morning. And I've got to tell you, it just completely, I don't know, it bummed me out. It's depressing. Peasant people in the Bible are depressing. It's all about the living conditions, about having enough food to eat, living on less than 1 denarius a day. It just goes on and on and on. So I think if I was a rich landowner in Jesus' time, how could I be expected to enjoy my God-given wealth with all that complaining going on in the background? But then one minister in the prosperity movement said that he encourages his congregation to help the poor by not becoming one of them. When he said this, I thought for a moment, I was having another Oprah moment, that my eyes had been suddenly opened wide to the gospel. What better way to help the poor than by not becoming one of them? But the fact is, I think my conscience is getting the better of me, and your prayers must be working. So where is the seriousness in this so-called sermon? It's all pretty serious if you ask me. Greed is serious business. But I hope that this morning that you can see the message embedded, albeit very deeply, in the satire, that you can see it for the social critique it's meant to be. What if we're being asked in our parable to consider that maybe this isn't a story about a generous landowner or even a representation of what equality and fairness should look like in the kingdom of heaven? What if the parable is a social critique? Jesus starts out the parable, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner." We often hear Jesus say in the Gospels that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It is here and now. And in first century Palestine, the kingdom of heaven was indeed like a landowner. Landowners were members of the elite urban class, and many of them profited off of the misfortune of the poor, sometimes seizing peasant farmland when a farmer defaulted on his debt repayments. So my problem with interpreting this parable in the typical way is that the landowner usually is interpreted as a symbol for God. But I think the original hearers of this parable, peasants themselves, would have understood that the term landowner was functioning as a symbol for the oppressive elite. Furthermore, we have to be mindful that Jesus lived in an honor-shame culture. The fact that the landowner wants the first hired laborers to see what the last hired laborers were receiving in payment, I think is a challenge to the first honor. In other words, the landowner humiliates them by conducting this transaction in front of them. When they grumble, the landowner uses a condescending form of the word friend to insult their honor again. This time by saying, "I can do what I like with my money and my land." Jesus' audience would have seen the scandal because the land belonged to Yahweh and to no one else. There are many more reasons why I personally don't accept the typical interpretation of this parable. But my hope is that you'll take the parable away with you and wrestle with it yourself. There is a great Jewish tradition of arguing with the teacher, and I quite frequently argue with Jesus. So I think most of us in our lives just want to live comfortably. I don't think there's any shame in that. I think for our purposes, we need to be alert that the comfort is not coming at the expense and the pain of others. We would do well to remember that the kingdom of heaven is not a place. It's a way of being, a way of behaving. It's learning how to be responsible for each other here and now. As Christians, we've inherited the responsibility to make the kingdom visible and to critique the powers of greed and oppression, whether we do that through satire or through parables. But always doing it to bring about the kingdom. In closing,